Today on the Fearless Future podcast, we are going to dig into the often overlooked but very important topic that is birth trauma. What is birth trauma? What are the impacts of birth trauma on maternal wellness? How does it impact a family? And what can we do about it as a culture and as a healthcare movement? That's what's coming up today on the Fearless Future podcast. Welcome to the Fearless Future podcast, where your hosts Lisa Canning and Leah Jacobson will explore what the world would look like if women didn't fear pregnancy. Through education, community, and healthcare solutions, Guiding Star Project strives to make this a reality at our physical centers across the United States. Join us. Leah Jacobson, how are you?
Good morning. How are you, Lisa?
I'm alive. It is a beautiful day here, and you have come off of a very exciting last couple days of travel and excitement. Tell anybody who does not know where you've been for the last little while, what you've been up to.
Yeah, it's been more than a few little days. I think this has been the longest. I was trying to think, I was like, is this the longest trip I've ever taken without any of my family members? I think it was, like, since the beginning of my marriage. And so It was actually 10 days on the road by myself without my husband or without any of my kids. So that was a kind of a strange experience in itself. Like just kind of thinking of my family at every moment, because as a mom, you never really shut that off. But I was 2 events back to back. And the first one was Washington, D.C., the Celebrate Life National Conference and Rally, celebrating the 2nd anniversary of the Dobbs decision. The Supreme Court Dobbs decision was held in D.C. on, so long ago, I can't remember the day. What day was this? The 22nd, I think, or 21st. I don't even know what day I was there, but I was able to.
Yes.
A long time ago last week, I spoke in DC on a panel on women's health issues, and it was a great panel that they put together. It was myself and then Dr. Marguerite Duane from FACS, our dear friend Marguerite, and then it was Tracy Windsor, who I just met, and she's the founder of the organization Be Not Afraid, which was about adverse prenatal diagnoses and basically everything that goes into when you get a diagnosis that's less than ideal, how to handle that. And fantastic speaker. So much of what I want to talk about today actually kind of was a little bit of like what she was talking about, how traumatic it can be as a parent trying to navigate the healthcare system, just the trauma that can come with that. So that was my first trip. And then I stayed overnight a night in DC. And then in the morning, I got up and I flew to Boston for the entire week. And I took part in a course through the Abigail Adams Institute at Harvard University, which was so cool to be like, I'm going to class at Harvard for the week. And I got to go to a class about the body, vulnerability, suffering, identity, a lot of philosophy, which I'm not well versed in. So I had a really humble week of reading Plato and Socrates and all these ancient thinkers up through modern times and going, wow, yeah, we've inherited some really interesting mindsets over the last millennia. So
wow. What whole 10 days. So I'm curious, Leah, this is the 2nd anniversary of Dobbs. Did you notice anything different on the Hill? Like what was the vibe? Was it very similar to other rallies and events that you have attended at the Capitol, or was there a difference?
I would say that this one is quieter. It wasn't as, inflamed or rambunctious. I was there when they were doing the Dobbs hearing, when they were arguing the case in front of the Supreme Court. That was probably one of the wildest experiences I've ever had on Capitol Hill. With, the 2 opposing sides, with bullhorns screaming at each other, that was pretty wild, 2.5 years ago. And then, when the Dobbs decision came out, it was very celebratory, but also very like doomsday, like it was a lot. And now 2 years out, it was sort of subdued, I think is the only way I could really describe it. There were a very small contingency of protesters too. There were 2 protesters. But they made a splash because they had a giant hot pink sign that said, something about women's healthcare. Abortion is healthcare, I think is what their sign said. And then even, the people that were there to celebrate the decision, it was also a smaller crowd, I think. And I'm not really sure yet why. I'm still kind of reflecting on that. Maybe it's just the summer and everybody's excited to be home with their kids, enjoying the warmth, or if it's that we're not really certain what the national strategy is at this point. It was just an interesting moment to be there. So we'll see what happens. I hope this Celebrate Life event continues to grow. It was the first year they did a conference. They combined the pro-life women's conference, which previously we've taken part in and had the honor of, giving keynote speeches and being sponsors. They combined that conference with the Sidewalk Advocates for Life conference and kind of pulled together their audiences, which was, I think, a great strategy. And so I'm hoping over the next few years that it will continue to catch traction and we can kind of come together like those conferences previously have done and really strategize language and approach going forward.
When you talk about a national strategy, post jobs, it's no secret that we think a big part of that national strategy is healthcare. And we shared on our previous podcast, right before this one, why healthcare is so important to a pro-life movement, to women in general. We shared really interesting concepts as to why healthcare is the vehicle, the privacy that is retained, the fact that doctors are still so trusted in the eyes of society. So I want to encourage listeners to go back and listen to that podcast on why healthcare is critical to this type of a movement. And so I want to celebrate one more thing before we get into today's topic, and that is we have a brand new center to celebrate. A year ago, so at the time of this recording, end of June 2024, we were in Brainerd, Minnesota, very close to your hometown, Leah. And we announced on the stage that a Guiding Star local to that Lakes area was going to be open. And we are very, very excited that Guiding Star Crosby is now open. It's going to be offering limited services for women in the community. It's also going to be acting as Guiding Star National's headquarters. I am just so excited. We have another physical location to add to the family. How does it feel to have one like literally in your backyard, Leah?
Well, it kind of feels like about time. Like I don't know why. We did explore it. About a dozen years ago, probably about 12 years ago now. We did look at the community. We met with some different doctors, providers. We did an assessment of when we come into a new community with Guiding Star, we really try to do a good community assessment of what is the need. And 12 years ago, pulling everyone together, it was determined at that point in time that we had great resources for women going through all sorts of different experiences, unplanned pregnancy, needing help with fertility awareness. We had really good resources with our medical professionals in the area and allied nonprofit organizations. So at that point, we said, we're just going to keep supporting the local groups. And that's what we did for a long time. And so we kind of kept ourselves hidden and out of the way, out of the limelight. And it just became clear over time that we were needed. There was a hole in the market for our unique version of healthcare, our unique offerings. So it feels very like full circle, like, okay, now we're finally out front, like with what we do with our worldview. And I'm excited. I'm really excited. It was weird not being there. I was in Boston when they did the ribbon cutting blessing, and I'm watching it going, this is really, but also that was also very full circle too, to recognize I'm not essential to this. And that's good because there's people stepping up to take the reins. And that's just a really good feeling.
We have got to post this to social media. We haven't posted it yet, but we've got a great photo of you right in front of the front door of Guiding Star Crosby, with the beautiful new graphic of no woman should ever fear pregnancy. And this is the theme. Birth trauma, unfortunately, has an impact on how a woman feels about birth and future birth. We hosted a very intimate conversation on this in our Guiding Star Academy. We did not record it. We just invited women to come and share what are their stories of birth trauma. And this can be a source of incredible fear and tension around giving birth in the future. And so we thought it was important to talk about today. So Leah, let's just start with what is birth trauma for someone who might not be familiar.
Basically, birth trauma is anything that causes distress, like in a woman, to the point where she feels, trauma has varying levels. We all understand that some events are more traumatic than others. But really what the key kind of similarity that elevates it to a level of like a post-traumatic stress type of trauma is fear that you're going to die, or fear that you are out of control of the situation, that you are very vulnerable, that your life might be on the line, and you're not in control of the situation. I mean, those are kind of the key elements of any type of serious, severe trauma. Birth trauma is incredibly unique in that it's very hidden and often sort of dismissed if the outcome is okay. Especially, your baby's fine. You're fine. Like, get over it. Like, just focus on the next thing. Keep moving forward. You have a healthy baby. That's all you need to focus on. And, we'll get through it. And so birth trauma is an especially kind of insidious type of trauma because we normalize it as just part of becoming a mom. Like, everybody goes through it. Totally normal. Not a big deal. You're not special. Like, we all did it. And we almost like valorize it, like kind of like war stories, kind of like soldiers coming back from the war. And they valorize, or they have these sort of battle scars, battle stories. And so moms have the same kind of version. We kind of have our birth stories get valorized, and we kind of take pride in the amount of suffering. And, we kind of have to. It's like mental gymnastics. We kind of have to make this experience meaningful in some way because we're traumatized and struggling to understand why did it have to be this way? Why did I experience that?
So let's dig into that a little bit. Why does it happen? Is it a combination of many things? Is it primarily a mental circumstances happening? What happens? What's the impact, or how might it come about in a woman?
Well, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this today, in particular, July 1st, is actually it's my son's birthday. It's my oldest son's birthday. I now have gotten one of my children all the way through their teenage years, and I have a 20-year-old son. So my son turns 20 today. And so it's a reflective moment for me. I don't know if you do this or not, but I always try to tell them a little bit about their birth story on their birthday. I always am like, you were born at 9:02 a.m. after 47 hours of labor, whatever. Like, I tell them the story because I want them to know, like, this, we were in this together, like you and me, like this was our day. And that it was just such a special, thing that when you entered the world, it was this moment that deserves to be marked and remembered and honored. And so I reflect on their birth stories every birthday, and how this happens. I mean, that's a great question. I was young. I think for me, how it happened is just being completely naive to what would even happen, just coming in thinking, I'm just going to go in there, push out a baby. It's going to be great. I'm going to hold him. I'm going to breastfeed him perfectly. There's not going to be any problems. I came in extremely naive. And so I think that that's probably one of the most common ways that it happens, is just not being prepared and told what to expect. Yeah. I don't know. How are you with your first birth? Were you prepped?
It's why education is such an important tenet to us here at Guiding Star. Why we have so many programs and curriculums available to our women, because I would say a lot of my small t trauma was so much anxiety leading up to the actual birth. I had so much fear of the unknown. I had so much fear of being able to do any of it well. I'll never forget when the nurses left the room, and I was alone with the baby, with my first child, John. I was like, come back. Yes. Everybody come. Where, you can't leave me alone with a human being.
Yeah. And it's almost this unbelief. Like when they tell you can leave the hospital with your first baby, and you're standing in the parking garage, putting the car seat in, you're expecting someone to come out and stop you. You're expecting that they're going to be like, no, you don't know what you're doing. And you'd be like, oh, you're right, I don't. You kind of are hoping someone will stop you, and they don't. And you get in the car and you drive away, and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Absolutely. So I would say for me, it was a lot more of the mental anguish, or the true fear of the unknown. Will I be able to raise this child and keep it safe? But I know for some women, the trauma comes from more of the actual physical act and the perhaps choices or lack of choice that they had during their birth experience. So let's unpack that a little bit. What have you heard or observed from women where it's more physical, the trauma?
Well, I've been doing, I gave a presentation not that long ago, about a month ago. I was in Florida for the Florida Pregnancy Care Network. And I gave a PowerPoint presentation and I included a section on birth trauma because I think anyone that's working with women that are preparing to give birth, like they really need to understand that there may be pre-existing trauma from a previous delivery. There may be some things that they're really needing to come up against right away and address. And so I was talking about the importance of trauma-informed care with prenatal like education, and just helping them to understand that this is not as rare as it really should be. And so I'm pulling up my slide and I'm kind of looking at some of the presentation. So I'm going to give you a few of these stats here because it is just really important. So first of all, this idea that it's really not rare. Between 20 and 48% of women around the world report their birth experiences as traumatic. And that's that whole scale of, I like how you said small t trauma, versus like large T trauma. So 20 to 48% of women. So that's up to close to half of women potentially. And the lowest end is that is 1 in 5. It could be as many as almost every other woman or every 1 in 5 that they report this as being very traumatic or some level of trauma. And then the international rates of post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is around the entire world, PTSD, and PTSD is that much higher level of this is interfering with everyday life. This is a problem. We're having like physical manifestations to the stress and anxiety resulting from birth. That number is sitting right about 6%. And this is based on a lot of data. A more recent meta-analysis done just in the last couple of years says that new mothers, first-time mothers, that it's right about 4% is diagnosable as PTSD. Like this is the same thing as shell shock or something that somebody who has lived through, active duty combat would experience. And these are women that are going in and delivering a baby. So 4% of women worldwide, not just in the United States, worldwide. So I think that's a really interesting statistic because the United States, I would like to see our numbers by themselves. And I wasn't able to find that data. But worldwide, there are a lot of other countries that take a much gentler approach to childbirth and delivery. They follow the midwifery model of care here in the United States. That's not typically the model that's followed. We have much more of an obstetric specialist type model of care, which we know has resulted in poorer maternal outcomes. So statistically, it makes sense to fear for your life in a country where your life is most at risk. So I would be very interested to know what these numbers are actually in the United States for PTSD, because in 2020, the last year that I was able to find the statistics on this, the United States ranked last of all developed nations. So the initial study was done on 11 developed countries and we were dead last. And then they did a larger analysis to 55 countries, not even developed nations. Some of these are considered like, third world countries. And we came in 55th of all the countries when it comes to maternal health outcomes. So that's a really startling, damning statistic and piece of evidence that we're getting something really wrong in our country. And it makes sense that we would have women that are dealing with a lot of PTSD, that are dealing with a lot of, breastfeeding failure. A lot of these things have to result from being scared to death during our delivery process.
Some of the women who chose to bravely share their stories on our sort of closed door town hall community meeting, they just shared things that like they didn't feel heard by their doctor. They felt like their doctor wanted to push them towards a treatment plan or protocol that they really didn't want. We had several women just share the specific details, like literally being, rolled into a room for something without feeling like they were consulted or, it wasn't going in accordance to their plan. And so these are, and I've had some like intimate conversations with women where they have shared like, I would love a baby, but I am afraid of the actual birth experience. And so what do we do? What do we do on the front end, Leah? What do we do on the post end in the postpartum? What do we do as a healthcare system to support women? And how do women advocate for themselves? So many things to unpack. What do we do?
Yeah, oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack here. I think one of a really interesting strategy, though, that we've seen actually in Latin America, they actually have taken legal steps to protect women in labor. So the term obstetric violence actually was established as a legal term in Venezuela in 2007. They actually brought to legislation laws to protect women giving birth. So that's really interesting. And then 2 years later, Argentina did the same thing. And then Mexico did the same thing in 2014. So there is some recourse of action for a woman who feels traumatized and violated in the birth experience. And so that really makes providers in the delivery room much more aware of what is this woman experiencing. Like, we have to look her in the eye and make sure that this is something that she's, understanding, that she's consenting to, that she's not feeling powerless, that she still feels in control of her experience. The United States has its first case of this, actually. So this is interesting. It is touching the United States with a woman in Alabama in 2016. She very kind of controversially, claimed that she experienced something called birth rape. I think it's just a very interesting term. It's very inflammatory, but it's also, in her instance, I think perhaps appropriate. This woman, I think her name was Caroline Malatesta, I believe, and she was rewarded $16 million in a civil case in 2016 against the hospital. 4 years earlier, so it was in 2012 that this happened. She alleged, and it was proven to be true, that a midwife had wrestled her, physically pushed her back into her bed because she was trying to move around and get up, despite the baby not having any signs of distress. And then another midwife physically pressed down on the baby's head as it was crowning to hold it in place. And they did this for 6 minutes, and it was actually, in the medical chart. And so there was really no reason for this to have happened in this case. Like, no one really knows why they were doing this. It was just almost this power struggle move. And so she was awarded $16 million in Alabama. So I think the precedent is being set here in the United States legally for women to know, I have a voice. I do need to give consent. I may be the patient here, but I'm also the birthing woman. I'm in charge in many ways, and I need to be respected and worked with. So I think that's one thing that's going to have an interesting effect. Maybe encouraging women to use their voice, like knowing they have a legal precedence. But I think more so, it's a reminder to those providing support during birth that there could be, consequences to their actions. So I think we're getting the conversation just started here in the United States about this. And I think it's time. It's definitely time. Being 55th in the world on maternal outcomes is showing that our birth outcomes, like what we're doing in birth, isn't working. And then also just seeing how traumatized women are, we got to reassess the whole situation. We got to change some things policy-wise. Absolutely.
We did a webcast, I want to say, maybe about 6 months ago, where we had on a midwife who we love at Guiding Star Tampa, Tammy Suit, and we were talking about how the midwifery approach can be very patient-led, that it's very important that it is very patient-led. So for providers who might be listening to this, Leah, let's just unpack, what does it look like to be aware or sensitive or prevent birth trauma in that prenatal time?
Well, yeah, and the preparation and leading up to it, it's really education-based. Lisa, I don't know if you ever attended any of the childbirth preparation classes for your children. You've had several children. Did you go to any of the classes before any of the deliveries?
I went to, for my first child, so this was in 2009, I went to a birth class for him. And then I think they made me, quote unquote, go to another one somewhere down the road. But yeah, the first one, it was a VHS tape, I'm pretty sure, Leah Jacobson, that they pressed play on. I'm almost positive.
Wow. That was really, really personal.
But education, yeah. So you were saying education is important.
Well, and I asked that because I remember, I think I've always been a little bit of like a birth junkie, like somebody that's really into like, how do birth experiences, happen? And so I went to the one for my first child, which was at a hospital. And that hospital had like a level 1 NICU. So it was it was a hospital that had dealt with a lot of high risk. And I just remember, I'll never forget it. I was sitting there in the class and they were talking about birth and we were watching the video and they're talking about all the different drugs and medications and interventions and where it's appropriate to get each drug. And I remember just being so overwhelmed and thinking like, I just want to have a C-section. I just want a C-section. I don't want to do this. And feeling trapped. Like I'm already like 6 months into it. I'm like, it has to come out. like I don't want to do this. That looks horrible. It looks so painful. And wanting desperately to just have the most medicalized C-section birth I could have. And that was my kind of mental prep. So, you go into it kind of unprepared, not really knowing how it's going to work, but it was focused pretty exclusively on interventions and drugs was that first class. And afterwards, I just felt so kind of confused by the birth experience. I was like, why did it go that way? How did that happen? It was a vaginal delivery, but it was the epidural. It was the induction. It was the whole cascade of things. And I felt pretty wrecked afterwards. And then breastfeeding got off to a terrible start. Could barely breastfeed this baby. And so for number 2, I took a different approach and I took the childbirth class from the out of hospital home birth midwives. I wasn't planning a home birth, but I took their class instead. And I think it lasted 8 weeks and it was in person. And the entire focus of their class is this is what will happen at each of the stages of this delivery. These are the emotional signposts. This is what you're going to probably feel at this moment. You might be scared right here, but trust this process. It's happened a million times before. Like this is what will happen. And just being prepared so differently that time, it really changed my entire understanding and outlook of birth. It was a tough delivery. He still came out fine, sunny side up vaginal, but it almost went C-section again because I was still in the hospital setting. Did the birth class again with number 3 at a different location. So I think I've had birth education. I think I did it 5 out of 7 of my births just because I wanted to see the differences in how it was presented. And every one of them was completely different. Every one of them.
It's so interesting. Mine was experiential. So my learning, my education was 100% experiential and friends, to be honest. So I had epidurals for all my first 7 children. And then number 8, I knew was probably going to be electively natural. Like I wanted to try it. It was also a combination of the fact I knew I lived far from the hospital and I would deliver very quickly because my labors did intensify in terms of speed. So I would kind of just like be prepared. You probably won't get there with enough time. Yep. And it was a girlfriend of mine. I'll never forget it. She was my education. She just kept saying things like, you were born to do this. Yep. And it's not pain, it's pressure.
Yeah.
I had never heard anyone describe it like that before. And this is why, again, education is such an important thing to us at Guiding Star, because when you think about the patterns that neurologically are being wired, when you are told, don't worry, we have a drug for that, or like just this is how do I describe it? Like when you don't have a message of you were born to do this, when nobody is telling you that, my goodness, there can be just all kinds of fear and elective C-section, for example. Like it's just like, no, I don't want to deal with any of the fear. So let's see how we can do this in the most clinical way possible. Whereas truly, our bodies were designed to do this. And it was only at my 8th pregnancy that I really listened to that because, quote unquote, I was forced to. Like I was in a situation where I knew this will be very likely. And it did happen. My 8th was a totally natural vaginal delivery. And I remember thinking, and I know I've shared this with you before, I just remember thinking I have been like denied an incredible experience that I could have had 7 other times. But I totally, it just was sort of, I wasn't around a lot of people who had that mindset. I was more around a lot of people who were like, it's going to hurt a lot. So you're going to want to get that epidural right away.
Well, and an interesting thing, I was just thinking, I was like, okay, I was like 5 times I've had this birth class and I did it with 4 different hospitals. So 4 different, and so some had NICUs, some did not have NICUs. One was a rural access hospital. Actually, 2 of them were rural access hospitals. One allowed water births in the hospital, one didn't. So all of them had very different birth policies. And when I think about the content of each of their classes, the primary aim of the class was to inform me of their hospital policies and how they did things. So they would say, you can't bring a doula, or we encourage doulas. Or I remember one of them, I remember it being like, please don't bring a birth plan. We're not going to be able to accommodate it. And like just telling me basically how they viewed birth and kind of imposing upon me, giving me a heads up a little bit of like, these are our policies, not at all what was going to happen to me. It was how they were going to interact with me and what they were going to expect of me to be a good patient in their hospital. That's really what my birth classes were. 4 times, 4 different hospitals, I experienced that. So I think we just really have gotten birth education. And I think a lot of women would say, oh yeah, I did the childbirth prep class. But no, what you really did was like the hospital policy prep class. Like you really didn't do a childbirth prep class. You don't know anything about, early labor into, middle labor, into transition, into pushing. Like you really don't, probably.
That's a very important distinction that I really want people to sort of like listen to. There's a difference between a provider or a hospital policy class and this is what your body is going to do. And I may add, and it's amazing. You know what I mean? And just for clarity, we're not saying here that epidurals or interventions obviously are bad. Like we need to have appropriate care for women as needed. But what we are saying here is that let's not make it, this is the policy. Let's make it, I'm making a decision. Yeah. I am actively a player in what is happening. Yeah. Because it's your body that's doing it, right? So why wouldn't you be a player in that? But I think it's I think I represent like you and I are very different in terms of the sort of background we bring with us to birth. I think I represent a portion of the population that's not a small one. I just did everything my doctor told me, like, because I didn't have any other, I didn't have negative outcomes for the majority of my care. So I kind of was like, sure, why not? Of course, I'm going to do the exact same thing again without ever thinking that, oh, there could be some other potentials, other possibilities, right? And it wasn't until my 8th pregnancy where I just sort of knew, I had a feeling because of the distance to the hospital that this would be a very likely outcome, that my mind was open to an incredibly different experience of birth. And it was just for me, like, so empowering and so incredible. And I remember just being like, wow, I can't believe I never put this on the table for myself all these other times.
I think, and you really honestly, Lisa, while you represent a very large majority of the population in terms of like, I'm just going to, kind of believe my doctor, you actually represent a smaller part of the population in that I don't believe you really struggled with like the postpartum, the breastfeeding part of it, the depression part of it. You didn't really have those things either though, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's interesting. Like I certainly things were hard, and I of course have had many children, so there's the realities of a lot of children that just present interesting logistical challenges. But no, in terms of the actual baby and the actual process of raising an infant and nursing, I had very minimal challenges in terms of the postpartum period.
And that's the part that as a lactation consultant that I think I've kind of, as an IBCLC, when I get to have that intimate look at that very sacred postpartum period, those few days after delivering a baby, that's where I think I've been kind of tuned into like, this is a birth problem. Like this problem we're dealing with right now is a result of what just happened, 24, 48, 72 hours ago, that you are still in complete shock. Like you're still processing and you're, dealing with the aftermath and, trying to like assimilate this new part of your reality of feeling like maybe and some of these women will even articulate these things, even if it's like a subconscious thought, like they're even saying it like, I failed, like my body failed. Like, well, I'm probably going to fail at breastfeeding. I'm kind of like projecting forward this sense of like failure at the very beginning of their motherhood journey. Feeling like, and they'll say things like, my baby doesn't like me when they're trying to nurse their baby and the baby's screaming. And they'll say things like, my baby just doesn't like me. And they're like, it's this very sad. And I think birth trauma, I think it absolutely contributes to that. I mean, I think maybe it's anecdotal from my unique perch where I'm looking at it and seeing it and hearing what they're saying to me. But I can't ignore it. There's a connection. These childbirth experiences are absolutely affecting how we move into motherhood with confidence or no confidence.
And it speaks to a lot of things about the postpartum experience, and we've talked about this a lot on this podcast, just the importance of community. Another one of our really core values at Guiding Star. You need, like, community is so essential in the postpartum period. You need somebody asking, how are you doing really? Like, how are you really actually doing? I just to go into my experience a little bit, this is where there were maybe one or two times where I felt like, who is this, like, a bit more postpartum depression, anxiety. Like, so there were a couple of times, but, my doctor helped me navigate, and I kind of eventually sort of realized it wasn't, but it's a vulnerable time. You are alone often with a human being, even if you're with your spouse, especially in those first few children. They might not understand exactly what's going on. You might be getting all kinds of messages, and let's not even go to looking on your smartphone at social media and other people's highlight reels of newborn life. There's just so many different ways that a mom, I think, can feel isolated and challenged. And this is where an actual, in real life, human being who is coming to your house and saying, how are you doing really? And offering you that physical support is so important. I know you.
Yeah, I can't like say enough like how important people like postpartum doulas are, lactation consultants, like the people that come into your home in those first few days after you've delivered a baby. They help you process the entire thing, no matter how the story went. Like if you felt like a dang like hero in it and you were just awesome, and like they're the ones that confirm that to you, and they remind you of that when you're completely sleepless and you just want to quit and cry. Like they're like, no, you did this, you're awesome. Like they remind you of that. They're also the ones that help you work through that like moments of vulnerability and what really maybe didn't go the way you wanted it to go, and they help you own that story. And make it part of your reality, because we all experience suffering, we all experience setbacks, we all experience very difficult moments throughout our life that, if we don't have a mindset of resiliency, if we don't have, people kind of picking us up and helping us move forward, like it can be shattering. It can be really difficult to move on. And so these are
and that's important. As a mindset coach, I see it a lot. Like, I just watched Inside Out 2 with my kids, and there's a scene in it where it's like repressed emotions. Literally, they're like, "You're a repressed emotion now." You could have a situation where you did have a birth plan, and it was necessary to alter it for your care, for the baby's care, of course. It's okay to be disappointed that it didn't go according, and you've got to just like honor that. You've got to. And what does it look like to honor those feelings? You literally just feel them. Yeah. And maybe you have a trusted, friend or counselor or whoever, but somebody in your life who you're able to say to, that really didn't go the way I wanted it to. And then
we're so afraid of admitting that, aren't we? We're so afraid of like admitting that something didn't go the way that I lost control. And just this whole idea that I can control everything and I can make the outcome be exactly what I want it to be. And the reality is, birth is a very animal type experience. Like it's not our rational mind, saying like, okay, cervix open and dilate now at this rate. You don't get to tell your body what to do in birth. Like your intellect, your rationality, like it's not really there. You just sort of are like along for the ride, and you can cooperate and let your body lead, or you can fight it.
And it's challenging, because in fighting it is where I think a lot of problems will happen. Like that's what's really challenging. When they say that stress has such an impact on our bodies, it's true. Even in the course of giving birth, I'll tell you an example from this last one with my Lucy. My blood pressure is through the roof. They couldn't understand why. I couldn't understand why. But the challenge with blood pressure is when you are contracting. Yeah. You can't help it. Your body is like, I'm in distress. And so your blood pressure naturally goes up. And so that was the tension with my last birth. They were like, we really can't get your blood pressure this high. Like it's going to be a problem, right? And you can't avoid that happening when you're contracting. So we've got to, figure you out right now. But so if we can avoid the stress, is what I'm trying to argue right now. If we can avoid the stress with community, with great mental health practitioners, with even the tender love that a friend can offer, like even just things like that, we're going to have better outcomes 100%. I argue that you could have and forgive me, please don't send me angry letters for me saying this, but I argue you could have the best doctors. You could have literally the best doctor, the best midwifery team, the best advocates for your health. But if you have horrible negative self-talk, if you have an inability to, again, I'm going to bring up Inside Out. There's this beautiful scene in this new movie where all of the emotions, all of them, the good ones, the bad ones, every single emotion comes around the sort of representation of the person, Riley, the main character. They all just come around and hug. And I bawled my eyes out, Leah, because again, as a mindset coach, this is what I work with clients on all the time. It's this ability to be compassionate toward yourself. Yeah. So I honestly think you could be set up with every single, you could have a hospital in your house if you wanted to, but if your way you talk to yourself is not good, I argue we're going to have all kinds of problems, because I think that's actually more damaging.
Well, and I think the problem that we have with birth in particular is that the emphasis is always on the outcome for the child. Your baby's healthy. Whatever you're feeling doesn't matter. Focus on this other person. Your job now is to make sure this other person is okay. And we don't give ourselves even permission to say, I'm not okay. I'm not okay.
I don't think I've ever admitted this publicly, but when you've had as many children as I've had, so all of my children are approximately 18 to 24 months apart. I had most of them at the exact same hospital in downtown Toronto. Just very funny. I had the same combinations. I had about 3 different combinations of nurses and OBs because I came in so frequently. Do you know what I mean? So they would literally, they recognized me when I would come in, and I was a running joke because I would always come in with blow-dried hair and red lipstick on to give birth. So I became this oh yeah, it's you again. You smiled during your epidural. I became a bit of a joke.
You're a very good patient.
Yes. But my point is, I don't think I've ever really expressed this publicly. I almost built up I'm the poster child of easy delivery and easy postpartum. And so then when I wasn't feeling well, I would be no, you can't do this. You can't not feel well. You are the poster child of successful. And that's a problem. And so again, I can't stress this enough. Women, we need tenderness with each other, and we need tenderness with ourselves.
Yeah. And just that, a willingness to be vulnerable and to just not always have it Instagram ready, just not always be perfect. I've loved some of these younger moms that are just I don't know. I've seen some really honest stuff from younger moms. They're boob is leaking. They're just sort of but it's just so honest. And I think previous generations, I don't think you and I really got to see that 20 years ago.
No, 100%.
I had my baby 20 years ago. That was not something I would have ever seen.
You know what we should get, moms? Honestly, this should become a guiding star project on the anniversary of their firstborn, on the birthday of their firstborn. The moms should get, look, you've made it another year of motherhood. Because it is as much a badge of honor for us as it is.
Oh my goodness. So any young moms any old moms are duh, we know that we've been telling you this for years, but any young moms, truly, you grow as a mother. Every year, my oldest hitting 20, I get kind of emotional because I'm oh my gosh, I got one out of the teens. It feels just as much of an accomplishment today as it did the day I pushed him out. It feels like I'm growing, I'm learning, I'm becoming a new mom, a new mother in this next phase of life. Our motherhood continues. Every birthday for my child is the birth of me as a new mom in a new era. Every single one of them.
We keep coming back to this phrase, a future where no woman fears pregnancy. And I really stand behind that phrase in the sense that so much, I've done this 10 times. And for the majority of my experience as a patient and as a woman in society, so much of the birth and the prenatal and the postnatal was all fear motivated. There was a lot of things, you want to be careful of this. You want to be careful of this. Let's 100% make sure that you don't get pregnant again. So let's get you that. So much fear. And and this has been a very personal journey for myself as well. Like, meaning I didn't always think this way. Like I don't know. I didn't feel that empowerment that I do now. And I really relate that with having these very different birth experiences much later on in my motherhood career, like I like to call it. And again, what's the point I'm trying to make here is that this does not have to be something to be feared.
No.
Motherhood in all its forms and all its facets can be amazing. Are there incredible challenges? Absolutely. But there are incredible gifts in the suffering, in the growth, in all the things. Okay, Leah, I want to ask you a very sensitive question.
Oh, goodness.
What if a woman is listening to this and is like, I just don't agree with you too. Like, no, motherhood was like my first birth was too hard. My children are too draining. I never want to do this again. If it happens again, I don't know. Like for the woman who is feeling really hopeless or very defeated, or she has had significant trauma, what would you say to her if you could give her some hope?
I mean, the first thing I would say is you're not alone. Like, you're not going to be alone in this. You're not going to have to face this alone. Like, this is not your cross alone to bear. Like, what you are doing is for the good of all of humanity. And therefore, we're going to invest in you to make sure that you're okay. Like, you're not going to be alone. And the second thing, though, to make that true is don't be afraid to ask and accept help. Don't isolate yourself. This is not all on you. Like, you are not an individual island just floating out there. Connect to like the sisterhood, connect to this greater network of other women who have done this. I think that's something that we just really have assimilated almost in this last kind of like phase of the women's movement and feminism, this idea that like, no, like, like you can do it, like you're capable. Sure, you're capable, but should you have to in a time when you're physically needing help? Like, human vulnerability is one of the most beautiful gifts that we can give to one another. Being vulnerable with another gives them like dignity that you trust them. It gives them honor that you would entrust them with yourself. So don't be afraid to be vulnerable. And I know that's such a hard thing to ask in a world where so many people have been hurt and so many people have been wounded and we've been let down repeatedly by, partners, healthcare providers, systems. We've just been let down over and over again. But I would just, I guess my encouragement and my challenge would be, don't give up on hope. Like, don't give up on the idea that there are people out there that really love you and want to care for you. Like, that's true.
I often tell, I say this to myself as well, but I love just the concept of getting curious about your own resilience. Because resilience, like, think about it, Leah, you don't get stronger by just thinking about being stronger. Like, you don't get stronger by just being like, now I'm going to get stronger. You get stronger through going through things that are difficult. You build muscle by going through something and then making it out on the other end. And so I think what's challenging, is like I could never have imagined life with 10 children. Like, I just couldn't. I didn't come from that. I was not part of a community where a lot of people had, large families. Like, it just was not. If you had told me 15 years ago when I started my motherhood journey, in literally 15 years, you're going to have 10 children, like, I just would have been like, that's not even humanly possible. Like, so I share that story just because we are not, you don't have evidence yet of what you're capable of until you've gone through it.
Yeah.
And with the right support, I just believe that we're often a lot more capable than we realize. And that, of course, is a very challenging thing to navigate because you're like, well, what if I'm not? I don't know. Like, what if I'm not strong enough? But I don't know. Experience has shown me that, a woman can be very, very, very capable, and again, there's many things that need to be true for a woman to thrive in her life. But experience has shown me that you're often stronger than you ever realized.
Yeah. And the other piece that I would just say, like, 20 years into it now, 20 years in, like, I can't even believe that. Like 20, my son is 20. That's such a crazy thing to even say out loud. There's no way I could have been a mother to a 20-year-old, 20 years ago, but each year has prepared me to be that person who I am. Just like, the day you get a positive pregnancy test, you're not prepared to be a mother. You're prepared 9 months later. Like, you get the time and like the process. Like, don't be afraid to just lean into the process of it and trust that you will be given the knowledge and the information and the confidence and the hope and all the different things that are necessary as the process unfolds. As you are, challenged with these scenarios, you grow, and that you will be a different person, however many months later after you've seen that positive pregnancy test, you will be ready when the time comes. And maybe you won't feel ready, but you sure as heck will be, because you just got to be. And it's like that resilience kind of part of it. You just do it.
And this is why community is so important, because when you are having a bad day, you can have somebody else to come alongside you and lift you up and remind you who you really are. Alrighty, Leah, honestly, I could talk about motherhood all day, every day. But I want to just encourage, if you're listening to this and you have a story that you want to share, please just join us in our Guiding Star Academy, where we have a beautiful, completely free community of women who think just like you, that this is good, that your body is good, and that your stories matter. And if you care about this type of healthcare, we started this conversation around what's that national movement. And we at Guiding Star really believe that healthcare needs to be an integral and essential part of creating a movement where women don't fear pregnancy. So please, we ask you to consider donating to our cause. You're able to do that at Guiding Star. GuidingStarProject.com/donate. GuidingStarProject.com/donate. Leah, before we say goodbye, any final words on this topic?
I think it's possible for us to really make a dent and hopefully, fix the maternal health crisis in our country, really affect women in that postpartum period and help them to, not be so afraid, not fear future pregnancies, because man, we don't want to just have a bunch of one and done moms that are, think that they failed. Like, that's a sad outcome if we have women terrified of giving birth ever again because it went so poorly the first time. So I think we can really make a dent in it. We're here to do it. We're going to do it. Yeah.
Link arms with us. Alrighty, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Fearless Future podcast. Please like, subscribe, share this, download this, wherever. It definitely supports us in growing this movement and this conversation around a future where women do not fear pregnancy. We will see you next time.